But Sadiq was a man whom I met in 1956 in the city of Lahore, Pakistan. I was living there at the time as a missionary. I'll never forget, it was on Christmas Day. And on that day, a knock came at my door. I opened the door, and this Muslim man, at least he seemed to be, dressed in the common garb of the ordinary Muslim man, he rushed past me into my house, and he said, "Quick, quick, quick, quick." He said, baptize me right now." Well, I calmed him down.
Today, Amazing Facts speaker Joe Cruz tells the thrilling story of a Muslim man who gave up everything he had to become a Christian. Stay tuned for his concluding message in the two-part series entitled The Last Night on Earth.
Now, I want to try to answer the question today as to why so few people will be saved. Why so few people will really accept the message of truth and enter into that ark. You know, of course, what our Lord said. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. All right. Jesus said, just like it was back there, we can expect it to be again. Only 8 people went in then. That means that only a very small proportionate number of people at the end of time will enter into the ark of safety and be saved. Very few. Jesus said, narrow is the way and straight is the gate that leadeth to life, and few there be that find it. But why, friends? Why? The same excuses are given today. The very same things are being used. Now, the Bible says that the very imagination of their heart was evil continually. Those people had sort of deadened themselves by participation in the world of sin and the world of the flesh. And as they continued on in willful transgression, violating their conscience, sinning against the light of truth that God was bringing them through that great preacher of righteousness, why, this thing was happening. And their consciences finally became pretty seared. And of course, they had friends back there just like people have friends today. And the friend said, "Oh, don't worry about that. That old man down there, he doesn't know what he's talking about. The world's not going to come to an end. We've got plenty of time. Forget it. Enjoy yourself. Have a good time. Don't be so fearful of what that man is saying." Now, friends, I can tell you that the same words are being spoken today to people, aren't they? Friends, relatives, children, parents are comforting one another and saying, don't worry about those things. Don't worry about the coming of Jesus. Don't worry about the law of God. Don't worry about the Sabbath. Don't worry about keeping any of those commandments. We don't have to do that. Everything's all right. And so they go on and on doing that. My friends, today God is calling for people to step out in faith and exercise a little faith. But not many are going to do it. Not very many. Why? Because it requires sacrifice. That's why. We're living in a soft, materialistic world today when people don't like to make any kind of sacrifice or self-denial. Let's face it, you know, most people are not looking for the truth today. You know what they're looking for? They're looking for a smooth, easy, comfortable, convenient religion that will allow them to do anything they want to do and still believe that they can be saved at last. Now, let me tell you something, my friends. There is no religion like that, no true religion like that, is there? There's no true religion that allows you to live the way you want to live and have everything you want to have. Jesus said, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. It costs something to be a real Christian. It really does. Jesus said, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. And he said all. He meant all, friends. And we've got to be willing to give up anything. I don't care what it is. Friends, family. Jesus said, if you love your family more than you love me, you're not worthy of me. If you love your job more than you love me, you're not worthy of me. If you love your church more than you love me, you're not worthy of me. No, friends, you've got to be willing to give up everything for Christ. And I'm telling you that in this very affluent, materialistic age of ours, we don't find very many Christians with a moral backbone and courage and fortitude to serve God. We really don't. People are not willing to change their lifestyle or give up anything for God. And yet, we've got to be willing to, friends. But this is the reason Jesus said, narrow is the way and straight is the gate, and few there be that find it. This is the reason He said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the Son of Man. Why? Because they're not willing to change. They're not willing to forsake their sins. They're not willing to give up the things that are standing in their way, that they're making gods out of, that is keeping them from serving God and keeping all of His commandments. And because they're not willing to give up those things, they'll be lost. They'll be lost. Now, I've heard people say, well, Brother Joe, you know, if I had been back there in the days of Noah, I would have gone into that ark. Have you ever thought of that? Have you ever heard anybody say that? Oh, would you? Would you have gone into the ark, friends? Would you have been willing to risk the ridicule and the laughter? I mean, what about today? Are you willing to be ridiculed and laughed at today? Some people won't do that. They will never do anything that's going to bring embarrassment to them or bring any kind of ridicule on them. Well, if you had been in the days of Noah, my friends, and had gone into the ark, you would have been laughed at and mocked at and ridiculed. And I'm telling you right now, if you're going to follow Jesus all the way, you get ready, because you're going to meet it now. And if you don't meet any ridicule, and if nobody makes fun of you, and if you're not embarrassed by stepping out in the truth because of the way people are going to mock and laugh at what you're doing, then, my friends, you don't love Jesus supremely. Don't worry about what people say and think. You and I ought to be concerned about just one thing. What does God think? What is going to please Him? We're not living in this world to please our friends or to please organizations or to please any man. We're living here, my friends, for one purpose, and that is to please our Lord Jesus Christ. I've had people say, well, if I'd been back there in the days of the martyrs, I would have been one of the martyrs. Would you have been one of the martyrs? Millions of people died during those dark ages. You know what happened. And every one of them could have saved themselves by just one thing. Do you know how they could have saved themselves? Let me explain, friends, how that could have been. You could have saved yourself, had you been living back there, by going up in front of an idol and putting a little pinch of incense. You see, those people were brought to this place where there was an idol and a place for incense, and here was the stake over here. And you would have been told, now, if you go up there and offer that incense to the idol, you're home free. You can go home to your family. But if you don't, there's the stake waiting for you. And you know that millions of people were willing to die rather than break one of the commandments of God. Can you say you would have been one of them? You would have been one of them? Maybe you would. But I'll tell you something, unless you would rather die today rather than break God's commandment, you wouldn't have been one of those martyrs then, would you? You would not. You would not. Oh, it wasn't very easy to be a martyr, my friends. No, no. And all you need to do is just go up there and put a little incense. And you might have said, well, I'm just going to pretend to do it. I'm not really going to do it. God knows that I'm not worshiping that idol. I'm just going to go through the motions of it. Doesn't matter, my friends. It would have been an act of disloyalty to God. Those people weren't willing to do that. They died rather than do that. Now, they weren't worrying about losing a little money, were they? They weren't worrying about losing a few friends, were they? They weren't worrying about their job and whether they're going to lose their job. Their lives were on the line, but they said, that's all right, I'm going to die before I'll break God's law. How many people do you find today that have that kind of moral courage, friends? How many people? This is why Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so it'll be in the days of the Son of Man. People don't have that kind of martyr faith today. People today aren't willing to give up a few dollars, let alone their lives. They're not willing to sacrifice a few friends, let alone their lives. They're not willing to give up their job, let alone their lives. Oh, no, friends. People today are weak, spineless, no courage, no faith compared to what those martyrs were. Listen, there are some martyrs around still. Don't misunderstand me. And I'd like to tell you about one of them. You may have read about Sadiq in my book called Reigns on My Life. But Sadiq was a man whom I met in 1956 in the city of Lahore, Pakistan. I was living there at the time as a missionary. I'll never forget, it was on Christmas Day. And on that day, a knock came at my door. I opened the door, and this Muslim man, at least he seemed to be, dressed in the common garb of the ordinary Muslim man, he rushed past me into my house, and he said, quick, 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 quick. He said, baptize me right now. Well, I calmed him down, and he began to talk and to tell me who he was and why he was saying these words. I found out that Sadiq was from the tribal areas of Pakistan, way up there near the Khyber Pass. In fact, he lived right in the Khyber Pass area, near the borders of Afghanistan. And that's an area that is ruled by Muslim law. There is no government control up there. And when I traveled up there myself, they sent an armed guard along with me because they could not guarantee safety. Up there, every man carried a gun or a knife or an axe, and they took the law into their own hands. And so this man was from that area. And he told me what had happened up in that area. You see, a colleague of mine had been up there holding evangelistic meetings, and he had a tent there. And every night this Muslim man would travel from his work home, and he'd pass right by that tent. He didn't dare go inside, of course, because his life would have been endangered immediately, but he stood out in the shadows of the trees, and he listened to the message night after night after night. And when the calls and the invitations were given, he didn't move forward like a lot of people because he didn't dare. He stood outside with tears streaming down his cheeks, and he went home that night, and he said to his wife, "Listen, I'm going to be a Christian. I've been listening to those messages, and I know it's right, and I'm going to become a Christian." Well, my friends, the next day when he came home from his fine government job, he found his house empty. His wife and children had been taken away by his father-in-law. He was never to see them again. And then, the next day after that, he lost his job with the government because his relatives went to the government and intervened against him. He was now an infidel, and so there was no job for him any longer in the government. A few days after that, he was waylaid by his own relatives and beaten almost to death. He was left for dead, unconscious in the gutter. When he recovered his consciousness, he fled for his life and came down to the teeming city of Lahore, Pakistan. He had found out where this evangelist lived, and here he was now in my living room begging me, "Please baptize me now." And my friends, we filled the baptistry, and we baptized Sadiq that day, and I'll never forget that as long as I live. As he came up out of the water, the scars on his face that I looked at, he'll carry them the rest of his life. He'll be a refugee for the rest of his life. If his family ever finds him, they'll kill him. And so he must hide out from his own relatives, his own family, and flee always for his life from place to place in order to live, never see his children again. He had given up everything he had, really. He was a member of my church there. I'll never forget. He came to me one day and he said, "Please, Pastor, go and talk to the mission board and have them send me over into Afghanistan." He said, "I want to go as a peddler and seller of cloth, and I'll give out copies of the Bible as I go, and I'll spread the message." And I said, "No, Sadiq, if you went there, you wouldn't live 24 hours. They don't even allow a Christian to come in there and speak of Christ or Christianity. They'd kill you. You wouldn't live 24 hours. He said, "That doesn't matter." He said, "I want to go, please." He said, "Ask them to let me go." Here was a man who'd given up everything he had. He'd lost his family. He lost his home. He lost his job. He almost lost his life. And now he's saying, "Let me go. I want to go there." My friends, do you know what it is to sacrifice? What are you giving up for Christ? What are you giving up for Christ? There are some, my friends, in this city who won't even give up a friend or a dollar or a few trifling worldly things. I've had people tell me, "Well, look, I can't change my way of dressing. I can't give up these worldly things. I can't give up my pork and my shrimp." Oh, friends, listen, what do we think? What kind of a religion are we looking for? Are we looking for a cheap religion that doesn't require anything? If it doesn't cost us anything, it's not worth anything, my friends. It's not worth anything. We've got to be willing to give up everything. We must be willing to give up everything. And I appeal to you to make that decision to go all the way with Jesus. Don't be afraid of that. Some people say, "Well, Brother Joe, if I'd lived back in the days of Jesus, I would have been one of his disciples." Would you have been one of them? Do you know what it meant back there to really follow Jesus? You were thrown out of the synagogue. Do you know what that involved? That meant that you were disinherited from your family. You were boycotted in your business. You were actually counted as though you were dead. Your own friends considered that you had died, the funeral had been held, and you were gone. They wouldn't even acknowledge your presence. They really wouldn't. That's what it meant to be cast out of the synagogue. You say you would have been a follower of Jesus back there? Maybe, maybe. If now you're willing to suffer anything for Him, then you would have been a disciple maybe. If you'd be willing to give up anything, your friends, your job, your church, anything at all that comes between you and God and obedience to Him, then of course you would have been a disciple of Jesus back there, because that's what it cost them. It cost them their church, their family, their home, and their business. And we've got to be willing to give up any of those things, my friends, or even all of them if it's necessary. We've got to give up everything to follow Him. You come back there to the days of Noah. What about Noah's day? Was it easy then? Did it sound very logical or convincing to be talking about a flood, my friends? Do you know what the world was like in those days? Listen, they'd never even seen any rain come down out of the heavens, had they? The whole earth was watered by a mist that came up from the face of it, we're told. And those antediluvians had never seen it rain in their whole lifetime. Now, it might not be hard to convince people today that there might be a flood, especially if you go through one of these rainy seasons, as so many places are doing these days. But listen, friends, if you had never seen rain in your life, it would be pretty hard to convince you that a flood was going to come and wash everything away and destroy every bit of life. It really would, and that was the situation back in the days of Noah. And he proclaimed that message right up on the dry side of a hill where it had never rained. He was building a boat of all things. There wasn't any water within, I suppose, hundreds of miles. We don't know, but anyway, it wasn't going to rain. Everybody knew that. And yet for 120 years, the message rang out from that boat side that it was coming, it was coming, it was coming, and the people listened to it, and they got gospel hardened just like they do today as they heard it over and over again. And then, of course, the last day came. And Noah, bless his heart, had put away his tools now. It was all finished. His friends had helped him. His relatives had helped him. And now it was done. And he stood up there to talk to them, to preach to them, to invite them for the very last time. Can you imagine what that dramatic scene must have been like, friends? Listen, I've thought about it many times. And if I could go back in history, if I could move back through the years and listen to just one sermon that's ever been preached on this planet Earth, I think it would have to be that last sermon of Noah. Wouldn't you? I've loved to have been there to hear what he said to those people. Oh, I've imagined, I've tried to go back in my mind to what it was like as he stood there knowing that this was it now. He was going to give his last invitation after 120 years. Oh, I know what it is to give a final invitation after a month. But I don't know what it's like to give a final invitation after 120 years of preaching. That was a long crusade. It really was. But there he stood now, and he preached to those people, and he appealed to them to make their decision, and he looked down into the faces of those people, his own friends, his own relatives. Many of them had been co-workers with him there, no doubt, in helping to build the ark. And he pleaded with them. He said, friends, it's coming. It's coming. This is the last call now. This is the final invitation. You've got to come in. It's your only hope. Don't let anything hold you back. Come on. Come into the ark with me. You saw the animals go in. You know that God's been working in this. And my friends, I can just imagine the deep stirring of the Spirit of God on the hearts of those people. Can't you? Oh, I think that there were people out in that audience that day who were stirred so deeply with conviction by the earnest words of that preacher that they started moving. I can see a wife over here, and she begins to work her way through the crowd to go forward, and her husband reaches out and pulls her back. I can see a young person over here begin to move forward, and the parents reach out and pull him back. And people whisper to each other, and they're stirred with conviction. But that's all there was. Noah kept on talking, kept on pleading. And then I can see the old man as he turns weeping, and he walks through the door of that ark, and then he comes back again, and he stands there and makes a final call. And once more, the people move uneasily in their places because they believe what he's saying. They're stirred by what he's saying. But then finally, poor Noah has to turn, and with tears on his leathery cheeks, he walks back through the door of the ark, and then an unseen hand closes that door. And I can see the people as they stand out there talking, and one says to the other, "My, have you ever heard anything like that? Wasn't that something? Do you think he really was telling the truth? Do you think there really will be a flood?" And then the people began to sort of scatter. And then they went to their homes, and it was a very uneasy time. And maybe for a day or two, they were still very, very uncomfortable and under conviction. But then the days passed by. 5 days, 6 days, 7 days went by, and there he was all locked up in that thing, and the people were walking by, and now their attitude was changing. And they were saying, "Oh my, I'm glad I didn't go in. Look, they're all locked up in that hot old boat, and nothing's going to happen. Poor Noah, he's going to be so embarrassed when he has to come out." But then, my friends, right there on that 7th day, suddenly there was a tremendous roar of thunder, and then the heavens opened up, and the very fountains of the deep, it says, were broken up, and the water began to come from everywhere. And people began to run to get away, running to the highest mountains they could find and climbing the highest trees they could find. But then one after another, they were carried down into the murky depths by the waters, and then there was just a boat. Jesus said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the coming of the Son of Man." My friends, God's message is sounding today. People are under conviction about the message and the truth, just like they were back then. And they sit and they believe it. They know it's right. But how do you get them to move, friends? How do you get them to move? I know how Noah felt. I can't understand the depth of his feeling, because I don't have a whole world listening to me, friends. But I have 500 people, or 1,000 people, or 5,000 people sometimes. And I know exactly what's going on in the hearts of those people. A tremendous struggle is going on, just like it did in the lives of the antediluvians. People believe it. They tell me, "Yes, I believe it, but I'm not ready to do it yet. I'll do it later. Someday I'll do it." Oh, my friends, suppose they'd say, that's what they said to Noah. That's what they said to him on the last day. "Oh, yeah, someday. But then the door shut, and that was it. Oh, my friends, here we are, the last day of the crusade, the last message of the crusade. And some of you have not made a decision yet. I don't know why. I don't understand why. You believe it. You know it's right. And yet somehow you're being held back. People are holding you back. Friends are holding you back. Churches maybe are even holding you back, telling you that you should not obey all the commandments of God. My friends, God is calling for you today to make that decision. Please don't hesitate to step out for Him. Make your decision today, friends. Make your decision today.
This would be the year when Jesus comes, the year that we've been waiting for so long. We'd have so little time to get our lost world won. If this would be the year when Jesus comes. What if this would be the day when Jesus comes? The day that we've been waiting for so long. We'd have so little time to get our lost world won. If this would be the day when Jesus
journey back through time to the center of the universe. Discover how a perfect angel transformed into Satan, the arch-villain. The birth of evil, a rebellion in heaven, a mutiny that moved to earth. Behold the creation of a beautiful new planet and the first humans. Witness the temptation in Eden. Discover God's amazing plan to save His children. This is a story that involves every life on earth. Every life. The cosmic conflict. If God is good, if God is all-powerful, if God is love, then what went wrong? Available now on DVD